thanks very much. So I guess first of all, I have the short straw of being the live version, which means you get to ask me the difficult questions. I'm probably not the person to answer them. I should first of all apologise that nobody from the University of Aberdeen was here today, because they were the leaders of the project, and they were much more dealing with the kind of technical side of it, which I was just one of the 9 partners involved. So I was less involved in that side of it, but I think I can certainly give you an overview of the project and some of the problems that we faced and some of the things that I think going forward we need to think about. So just to give you a bit of background, Mungo obviously touched on this a bit. This actually really started with the National Audit. Those of you that work in museums will remember this exercise that was done in 2000 and something to actually figure out exactly what was in museums across Scotland. And that really showed just how much material was in Scottish university museums. More than 1.8 million items. And what we realised was a fairly substantial amounts of particular subject areas were held in those collections. So nearly a third of all history of science objects, nearly a third of all coins and medals, a quarter of the fine art in Scottish museums, a fifth of natural science collections, and nearly the same amount for world culture was held specifically in university museums. And yet the actual staff and resources available to those were not nearly that kind of level. And since the project happened, we've had the recognition scheme, and now 5 of the 9 university museums in Scotland have recognition status as being of national significance. However, very little of that material was actually available to researchers. Only, as you see, 7.5% were actually available through any kind of online database. 1.8% were actually represented on images in any sort of online form. And less than 40% of the actual total holdings of these university museums were actually catalogued in any state at all. So this was a real problem that we really wanted to try and address. And then at the time that we were thinking about this report came out, which some of you might remember from the Research Information Network, called Discovering Physical Objects Meeting Researchers' Needs. And they came to the conclusion that all museums and other collections should make the research data and their content management systems available online as soon as possible, without waiting until backlogs are cleared or records improved to levels of perceived perfection. And this has always, I think, been an issue, and a lot of museums, I think, have been reluctant to get things online because they're worried about the quality of the data. There's mistakes there, there's things they don't want to have shown and so on. Things aren't absolutely right. And this report concluded, well, don't worry about that, just get it up there, and you can worry about correcting it later on. So there are really 3 things that we wanted to try and produce by making all this information accessible from the 9 different university museums. And the first, as Mungo highlighted, were collection level descriptions. Now this was really quite a new thing for us. It's not really something museums tend to do. It's more of an archival thing. Because archives tend to get objects or items on a collection basis, museums tend to get objects on a one-by-one basis more, and then maybe allocate them to collections. But it was really seen as not only being a really useful way of actually making sense of this huge amount of material that we had for researchers, but also actually to deal with a lot of, well, with 60% of material that hadn't been catalogued at all. If you've got 40,000 butterflies, there's no way you're going to be able to catalogue those 40,000 butterflies to do this project, but you can at least write a collection level description to say we have a collection of 40,000 butterflies, and that takes almost no time at all. So that was really where our starting point was, but we also wanted to get item level records where we had them up, and also ideally produce new item level records, and also images as well. There was a real sense that photographs was very important for objects. If we could get them up and get more photographs taken, that would be really useful. And we wanted all of that to be ideally harvested automatically from the different databases held by the different institutions, and then sort of brought together on one database, which seemed fairly straightforward at the time, and of course actually was ludicrously complicated. And there are various different ways we wanted to make that available. Ideally what we wanted was for each different university museum to be able to have a search box on its homepage that you could just search part of the collections, and it would automatically search that particular part of the data. As it turned out, we weren't able to do that. It was just simply a step too far given the time and resources that we had. But we were able to create this specific search portal, the Revealing the Hidden Collections portal that Mungo mentioned, on the UMIS website. And then actually further on in the project, and this is something that actually emerged while we were doing the project rather than being something we should plan from the start, which probably we should have done, was we realised that actually, as Mungo suggested, what's the use of yet another search portal that people don't necessarily know about, they don't necessarily know to go there and look for things. So actually it needs to be part of something bigger. And we were able to work with the Collections Trust to have all of our data also up on the Culture Grid site and also on Europeana as well. And at the time, those were we really thought those were the two sites that probably were certainly the fastest growing at the time in terms of trying to aggregate different sets of data, and the ones that best seemed to fit the kind of data we were wanting to get up there. Whether we think that now, I'm not sure. And this is very much a partnership project. We had funding from the Scottish Funding Council. We hugely relied on technical expertise, not only from the Culture Grid, but also there were two companies that we employed to do the work, Knowledge Integration and GUI. But ultimately this was a partnership of the University Museums and our group UMIS. And UMIS is, one of the things that's really nice about UMIS as a partnership is that it is entirely inclusive, that all of the accredited university museums in Scotland are members, which is not the case, for example, for UMG, which is the English equivalent. Only, I don't know, maybe 60% of university museums in England are actually members of that. So we were able, obviously, because it's a much smaller set, we were able to immediately get everybody on board and signed up for this. And obviously, the project would not have had the same kind of impact if it had only been some of the university museums. So we got £240,000 from the Scottish Funding Council as part of a funding stream they had called SPIRIT, and I'm trying to remember what SPIRIT stands for. I'm thinking it's Strategic Priorities in Research and Innovation Technology. I'm kind of guessing the second half, but it sounds right. And they had the specific funding stream, and they actually kind of invited us, in fact, because we'd been having conversations with them about how we could make links with them. So they actually invited us to apply for that, which was great. And although we didn't actually have to put in any money in ourselves, it was very time intensive, and there were a lot of other pieces of equipment and so on we had to put in. So in total, in the end, it was estimated that about £78,000 of in-kind support was generated by ourselves. And we faced a number of challenges right at the beginning. The first was insufficient preparation time, because we had a limited amount of time to spend this money. We really, as soon as we got it, we had to get up and running immediately. And we kind of very quickly realised none of us were IT specialists at all. We were all curators. We didn't know what we were talking about. We kind of had an idea what we wanted to do. We didn't really know how we were going to do it. And I think going back, it would have been good to have actually started by speaking to the IT people and then saying, well, what can we actually do, and working that way, rather than saying, well, this is what we want to do, and then try to get some IT people to figure out how on earth they were going to do it. We inevitably had problems with recruitment procedures. We were trying to appoint a project officer, and individually the different university museums were appointing sort of part-time staff to do some of this cataloguing. And of course, getting through HR in any kind of university is a nightmare. And so that was delayed, and so we kind of were held up then. So we actually had to start the project before the project officer was in place, which was slightly complicated. As Mongo alluded to, there is a massive difference in the kind of collection sizes of the different institutions. So obviously Hunterian has, I don't know how many Hunterian, where's Malcolm? How many objects is Hunterian? Some. Right, huge, absolutely huge, and by contrast the University of Stirling has 300 objects. So I mean, there's a massive difference in size. And also we're all using different databases, which all work slightly different ways, and we were trying to get all of those databases to kind of come together into one, and that was a real technical challenge. And inevitably, and Amy in her comments noted this, we had to deal with the different priorities of different institutional IT services. Some IT services are really helpful and really want to support you. Others say, well, this has nothing to do with me, go away. And so there is undoubtedly two different languages that those curators speak and those IT people speak, and trying to get them together was a real challenge, I think. So, in a sense, the easiest thing to do was creating the collection level descriptions, because none of us were really doing that already, so we actually had to create a new database for doing that, and that meant we were all using the same database, so we didn't have those issues with the different databases. But we did have to think, what is the information we want to record on that, and I think I'm trying to remember what specific kind of metadata standards we use. I think we use ISAG, but I wasn't really involved in that side of it. So we came up with this as the sort of back end of, it was just a simple access database that we used to record the collection level material. And in working towards creating this database, we did a consultation exercise where we spoke to museum staff, we spoke to academics, we spoke to students, and we had a couple of different workshop events, not dissimilar to this, although not quite so many people here. And that was really useful because we came up with a number of key points, which I think are probably quite relevant to the project that you're doing here. The first was that we were very pleased to find that collections are considered central to teaching and research. Now, obviously, to a certain extent, we're preaching to the converted because the people we were speaking to were the people that we knew were going to want to use our collections. But what was really good was that academics were really keen to tell us how much they valued using museum objects. And so there's a quote here from somebody working with objects brings out questions from students that they wouldn't have otherwise thought of. Objects engage students and help the topic come alive. But there was also a real sense that access to collections should be improved. That often, while you might have a university might have great collections, actually getting physical access to them is often a problem. Particularly in some of the smaller institutions, there isn't necessarily an actual physical space where you can come and consult an object. And sometimes, something's on display, you can't get at it, and so on. And as somebody said, we're stuck using the same specimens every year because we've no idea what else is available to use from the museum. The third key point, enthusiastic staff result in well-used collections. A number of people had specific experience of both having really good, positive experiences of dealing with staff that really wanted to help them, wanted to get the objects out and get them used, but they also had negative experiences of dealing with museum staff who just didn't care, didn't want to deal with them, and so on. So that kind of one-to-one, no matter what kind of project it is actually really crucial.